with Roman numeral 7, Young America, America in the 1850s. Let's begin with the election of 1852. Franklin Pierce will defeat Winfield Scott. He sure does like running for president, Winfield Scott. There you can see the election. Scott got blown out of the water. Democrats nominated Franklin Pierce on the 49th ballot. 49th. I mean, what in the world? Pierce had the backbone of a jellyfish in a time when the U.S. needed strength. The reason they picked him is he's the one guy who didn't offend anybody. Hey, what about Pierce? All right, nobody hates him, and so they pick him. If Lewis Cass had been nominated, could have the Civil War have been averted? Take a look at his resume. Successful general, governor, secretary of war, original Mr. Popular Sovereignty. Resigns as Buchanan's Secretary of State for refusal to do anything in the South. He might have been able to take care of stuff, but we'll never know. Whigs go for a war hero. Winfield Scott, all fuss and feathers on the 63rd ballot. Boy, they couldn't pick a candidate either. So when in doubt, go for a winning general. Pierce wins easily over old fuss and feathers. Why? Well, free soil votes returned to the Democratic Party. They were on their own party. Now they're coming back to the Democrats. Democrats supported the Compromise of 1850. The Whigs were less enthusiastic about the compromise. Thus, you basically got the pompous man versus the bottle man. Yeah, Pierce liked to drink. So what happened to the Whig Party? The Northern Whigs liked the candidate, but not the platform. The Southern Whigs liked the platform, but distrusted the man. Increasingly, a national base for the Whig Party is difficult to maintain. They're becoming very sectional. So speculate on the party that might replace the Whigs and their platform. Republicans, excuse me. So let's look at expansionism, manifest destiny after the Mexican War. It left U.S. territorial ambitions continentally complete. Manifest destiny has been achieved. This should have been an excellent opportunity for the U.S. expansion because of the involvement of France and Britain in the Crimean War. We could have advanced further into the South, Mexico, Central America. Instead, each territorial debate tests the virility of each section. So every time they look at manifest destiny, the North, no, and the South, no. You're just not going to happen. So the emergence of the issue of slavery's extension made acquisition of new territory nearly impossible. So first, expansion of trade with the Far East and Canada. The Treaty of Wangia. 1844 offered the U.S. the most favored status in China. Means that's a big market. A lot of customers. A lot of raw materials. In Japan, you're going to get Matthew Perry open up Japan to Western influence through a display of force. They saw his steam-powered ships, and they realized the writing on the wall, we better catch up technologically. And then with Canada, we get the Canadian Reciprocity Treaty of 1854 that allowed free trade across the borders. There were early attempts to annex Hawaii in 1854. It'll take 100 years before we actually make it a state. There was opposition in the U.S. Senate from U.S. sugar interests. Also some opposition from France and Great Britain. Foreign policy in Central America, we had Colombia's sovereignty over Panama in exchange for rights to build a canal. So we said, okay, Colombia, you're a country as long as you let us build a canal someday. British rights guaranteed in Nicaragua. And a treaty you must know, the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty. This is going to become important later on when we get to the Panama Canal. Any canal will be a joint venture between the U.S. and Great Britain. So this treaty sets it up. If anybody's going to dig a canal across the Isthmus of Panama, It's got to be between Britain and the United States. One can't go it alone. We get some filibustering expeditions with some very colorful people. William Walker, with encouragement of Vanderbilt, took over Nicaragua for 2 years. He'd already attempted to take over Lower California. George Bickley attempts some filibustering in Mexico. But the most important of these were the attempts involved in Cuba. In 1848, the U.S. offers to buy Cuba from Spain for $100 million. It's refused. Filibustering expeditions then in 1850 and 51 led to the execution of 40 Americans. This is significant enough for mobs to burn the Spanish consulate in New Orleans. Seizure of the Black Warrior ship leads to official U.S. protests. Then in 1854, we get the Ostend Manifesto. It was just an advisory paper on what to do about Cuba. And in this advisory paper, not meant for public consumption, encouraged the U.S. to offer Spain $120 to $130 million for Cuba. And if they refused, then it would be justified to take it by force. This becomes public. Northerners view it as a slave owner's conspiracy to increase potential slave territory. So here's this foreign policy entering the sectional tension arena here. All attempts at expansion tend to be viewed by the North as Southern attempts to expand slavery. That would upset the political balance, which right now is controlled by the North. Probably most were personal filibustering expeditions, although probably not all were. Emotionalization. No, this is a big theme. You get Uncle Tom's Cabin. Ching, 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 ding, ding, ding. Book written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, the second most popular book of the entire century behind the Bible. Its influence cannot be overstated. President Lincoln considers Harriet Beecher Stowe the little lady who started the big war. Sells more than 300,000 copies, and you have to realize back then, when you read a book, you lent it to somebody else. Books would be read by many, many people passed around. Then the Transcontinental Railroad. All right, now we got money and power. Manifest destiny. Oh, we got it all in the railroad here. So the Gadsden Purchase. Gadsden Purchase was bought from Mexico for a cool $10 million for a bunch of desert. Mexico is like, are you kidding? Yeah, we'll tell you that. And the reason why is if you look at any map, mountains, 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 and then they kind of chill out in this area, and then mountains, 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 mountains again. So this would be a nice flat area to build a southern route for a southern transcontinental railroad. Wherever the railroad would end in the east would provide a tremendous economic advantage. You got I-40's terminus is Wilmington, North Carolina, right? So potential routes, northern route, central route, and southern route. And wherever the railroad went, your area was sure to prosper. If you take a look at the towns are all built in the center of the town, the railroad. Take a look at Wallace. Same thing. Which came first, the railroad or the town? And I tell you, it's the railroad. So what are the advantages of a southern route? Well, it's the least costly route, after the Gadsden Purchase, of course. Traveled through organized territory, so everything was already organized. The northern routes had to go to the Kansas, Nebraska areas, all those unorganized areas. And had potentially dangerous Indians when building the railroad. Despite the advantages of the southern route, it's doubtful that the North would have supported it, because the economic link it would have created. It would have connected the South to the West, not the North. All right. Now we get the Kansas-Nebraska bill. You can see Kansas-Nebraska territory. They're ready to become part of the United States, especially since we need them organized to build a railroad across them. So with the advent of the railroad and with the North wanting to be the eastern terminus, this question must be addressed: how to organize Nebraska and Kansas territories. First off, personal motivation. Oh, here he is. Little giant, Stephen Douglas. He was a land speculator and railroad investor, and the choice of a central route was dependent on Nebraska territory being organized. He had land. If the railroad goes through his land, it will double in price or more. He'll make a fortune. He also had a political stake for his state, and that the central route would benefit his state of Illinois. And a national political stake. He was looking at the presidency. He could gain Southern support by introducing popular sovereignty in Kansas and Nebraska, and gain Northern support through eastern terminus of St. Louis and Chicago. He was trying to play both the South and the North. Organization had been attempted earlier, but had been voted down by the South. Of course, they didn't want new states to become free states, tip the balance of power in the Senate. So we need new lands. Changing pioneer characteristics created the need for new lands. Farming no longer depended on running water and timber. We had technology. We had water wells. We had sod houses. Yes, indeed. You too can own a sod house. We have dirt. We have grass. You don't even need a broom. The floor's made out of dirt. Married? Excuse me. Single? Married. Let me show you that again. Single? Married. Single? Married. Single? Married. Single? Married. Yeah, you can tell the two different types of sod houses there. Well, there wasn't a lot of land in the east, so moving west was the way to go. Technological improvements made farming on the Great Plains profitable. You had the reaper, steel plow, barbed wire, and prairie fan, which pulled the water from the deep, deep wells in the Great Plains. Barbed wire, got buffalo. One herd of buffalo ruins your entire crop, you starve to death. The barbed wire keeps them away. Later on, when cattle herders come, they're going to run into the barbed wire, preventing the cattle from eating, and this gives you cattle wars. So barbed wire, very cheap way to fence in their cattle, ultimately ending the open range. The prairie fan or water pump, use a windmill to pull up the water. And of course, John Deere's steel plow would allow them to plow the Great Plains soil. Rising grain prices. If the price of grain is going up, guess what I'm going to plant? Grain. And transportation improvements, particularly the extension of the railroads onto the plains. All those are reasons why Kansas and Nebraska were becoming populated, and now why the Kansas-Nebraska Act is necessary. So what were the provisions? Number one, and let's take a look what you're looking for. Number one, here's Kansas-Nebraska territory. Division of Nebraska into two territories. They wanted to make it into two. Popular sovereignty would be used to determine the slavery issue. There he is, the second Mr. Popular Sovereignty. Lewis Cass is really Mr. Popular Sovereignty, but he's the one most famous for it. The Missouri Compromise was explicitly voided. I mean, if you look at the line, you bring that across, all this land right here, that should be free. Implicitly, this was assumed Nebraska would become free and Kansas slave. That would keep the balance, right? Wrong. Passes May 25th, 1854. What goes wrong? How could anything go wrong getting a spray tan? Well, one, politicians, Douglas's failure to realize how intensely immoral the issue has become. That Fugitive Slave Act really got tensions going. And then you throw in a little bit of the Uncle Tom's Cabin, and you just got a mess. Quote, the South had not asked for Kansas, did not want Kansas. But Southern honor dictated that once slavery became a possibility there, that it be successfully extended. Thus, honor and prestige meant more than practical application. Emotionalized. It's getting emotionalized. Northern opposition to the extension of slavery had even turned against popular sovereignty as a means of justifying it. The Missouri Compromise carried the force of law in the North. With its revocation, it was a signal of ill will on the part of the South. It was like breaking a sacred covenant. It was like cheating on your wife. You just can't take it back, man. This led to significant change in Northern attitudes. Great SFI here. Fantastic. How did the Northern attitudes change with the Kansas-Nebraska Act? Well, here you got President Brown University, extremely good Ivy League university. In 1844, quote, to terminate slavery by violence without previous moral and social preparation would be a calamity. 10 years later, after the Kansas-Nebraska Act, this is just cause for the dissolution of the Union. Wow. What a change of heart. Southerner, who's visiting in Boston, said, if the Nebraska bill should be passed, the fugitive slave law is a dead letter throughout New England. As easily could a law prohibiting the eating of codfish and pumpkin pie be enforced. Or as easily could the law prohibiting the eating of biscuits and fried chicken in the South be enforced. 2 days, not 2 weeks, not 2 months, 2 days after the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, a Boston mob attempted to rescue a fugitive slave being returned. A battalion of artillery, 4 platoons of Marines, and 22 companies of state militia had to be called off. Cost of returning one slave? Almost to $100,000. Congress failed to see the depth of feeling about this issue. They were blind. They were worried about self-interest. Politician? Worried about self-interest? Nah. All right. So here's the big result from the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It's the emergence of the Republican Party. Yes, the Republican Party of today. Formed in February of 54, they immediately emerged as a second major party rather than some small third party that rises to prominence. From the outset, they're openly opposed to the extension of slavery. Notice they're not talking about banning it. It's the extension of slavery. Wilmot Proviso. This party, Republican Party, is banned in southern states. Wow. Has characteristics of the dreaded sectional party. And we remember what happens when parties become sectional and no longer national. Civil War. So in 1854, third party emerges called the American or the Know Nothing Party. A nativist party, and if you remember what nativist means, against immigrants, shows state success in New York and Massachusetts. Openly immigrant. When they came out of their meetings, they were asked, hey, what are you guys talking about in there? I know nothing. Nothing. Here you got a picture of Plug Uglies intimidating the voters. Go ahead and hit this link. That can give you some information about it. Pitched battles fought against Irish in St. Louis. In 1855, Southerners gained control. You know, I wanted to say something here. I tell you what, I would love for you to watch a movie called The Gangs of New York. Fantastic movie. Can really give you a taste of the nativism in the 5 Points area of New York City. So, starring Cameron Diaz and, what's his name? Titanic guy. In 1855, Southerners gained control and nominated Millard Fillmore. What are they thinking? Becomes a pro-slavery party and killing its chances in the North. Sectionalized, sectionalized, sectionalized. Quote, anything more low, obscene, feculent, the manifold heavings of history have not cast up. That will be the end of chapter 18. Now we're headed for Civil War.